Giallo Gelato serves up three films with ice cream that are celebrating the 50th anniversary of their releases, including a connection to the Chicago International Film Festival. In your
Who's that?
research, in your research, what did you find different about exhibition and distribution of films that seems ridiculous today?
That is such a good question. And to be very candid with you, it seemed ridiculous then when I kind of think about what was happening in 1976. So the Chicago International Film Fest has always been a nomadic film fest. And in 67, and I'm fairly sure 77, that was held at the Uptown, which of
Yeah.
course is a lost Chicago film palace. And in those years, the venue held, I think it was thousands of people who came to see these films from all over the world. What is very interesting in terms of the film Who Could Kill a Child, the fest screened the American version. And when I say the American version, I'm actually being very charitable because it's the defanged, bowdlerized, unacceptable version, Pat. That's the one it is. And there's an opening to the original film that is very in your face, very confrontational, and very uncomfortable. And given how ridiculous the premise of the film actually could be, aka Children of the Corn, and the killer kids that we see in the 80s and 90s, the opening of the original film really sets the tone for the political force that this film is, the moral compass this film is, the challenging questions this film asked. And I was kind of surprised that the International Film Fest chose to show the American version, Island of Death, I think is what it's called, in typical wonderful VHS form. But the long and the short of it is, just as it is now, distribution is going to be decided on at some point by a small group of people who get to choose what happens when they hit play, what
Yeah.
version it is when they approve the screening. And I was not only delighted to bring in that 50th anniversary of the Uptown, the excitement, what they must have felt in 76, but really restore the director's original vision in another restored cinema, the Logan, which
Sure.
is one of the three restored cinemas Chicagoans are so lucky to have in our
Yeah.
backyard.
Yeah.
So what an honor it is to, after 50 years, welcome Who Can Kill a Child, and also what we now know as Alice, Sweet Alice, which screened as Communion, another film which had a very strange distribution history, being released under different titles, coming off the shelf once one of the cast members hit some fame. So I just love the idea of reaching into the past and celebrating a half century of longevity, a half century of being available one form or another to audiences, and really delivering the vision, the title, and the respect that those two films in particular deserve.
The theme for the Surgical Science Museum in your famous Giallo Gelato is regarding four cult films and their Chicago connections. What clicked for this theme, and what fact came forward from what film that truly astonished you in its Chicago-ness?
That is such a great question, Pat. As a daughter of Chicago, a native of Lakeview, somebody who was educated in the Gold Coast and Evanston, and has lived, worked, and really had a blast all around town, really showcasing how Chicago, unlike Los Angeles or New York, for example, where the connections are obvious, in fact, commercialized. I really wanted to center these films and these programs not only in the genres that they represent, but also among the city that we love and that we live in. And when you look at where the films had played, where the films had been filmed in some regards, who they cast, who was the crew, the history in Chicago, I was as surprised as anybody, really.
Right.
The one film that truly blew my mind is the one I am screening tonight, The Unknown Man of Shandigor. And in a film that was made by a Swissman, filmed all over Europe, actually, spoken in French, featuring the one and only Serge Gainsbourg of all people, there was a Chicago actor who is, in fact, the titular unknown man. So I just loved the idea of this scalpel summer, mad science, like, crazy nuclear anxieties being held down in a way by one of our very own. Obviously,
Cool.
the other connections are legion between the Uptown Theater, the writers of some of the films, but actually having a cast member in 67 in
Right.
in a lost European Cold War spy satire, that was pretty mind-blowing.
Cool. Let's talk about the International Museum of Surgical Science. What makes this venue so appropriate for both the summer series concluding and the 2 fall films upcoming?
The International Museum of Surgical Science is one of Chicago's most underrated, overlooked, extraordinary venues. It opened 72 years ago in 1954. And over the decades, as it's held down its beautiful marble halls, amazing collection of art, ridiculous collection of old surgical tools, it has happily survived 20th century insanity, 21st century mega insanity, and is now hosting a truly inspirational group of events, talks, lectures, and they've basically opened up the doors for programmers, for artists, for local people to come in and talk about things that might not really work at another venue. In terms of the vibe, the ambiance, the authenticity, the museum provides a space to talk about maybe topics that aren't as easily approached anywhere, let alone other prestigious venues. So, in the Hall of Immortals, which is one of their open, activated spaces, we show our films as the sun goes down and as the room darkens, statues of the world's most prestigious, smart, genius medical professionals, everyone from Mary Curie to Greek doctors, lights up in shadow. We put colored lights all around the room, and the audience is able to not only see a film, but receive it in the vibe, in the ambiance, where the topics are not only discussed, but welcomed. And I
Right.
think that's what makes it not only extraordinary, not only unique, not only unusual, but in a very real way necessary. These types of topics really deserve to be discussed in an atmosphere of calm, an atmosphere of respect, and most of all, an atmosphere of welcome. And I think of all the venues around town, the Museum of International Surgical Science really fits that bill.
The Loved One was born from an Evelyn Waugh novel, but also had roots in a expose of the funeral industry at the time, The American Way of Death. What makes this film so essential to the 1960s canon? And as its 1965 release was on the cusp of the swinging 60s movement for the rest of the decade.
This film, The Loved One by Tony Richardson, the only way I can describe it is far out. It is so far out. I watched it start to finish the other night, Pat, and there were a few times I was barking like a dog. I let out noises from the humor is so dark. The satire is so acidic. The crew who brought it together. I mean, we've got, of course, Chicago royalty, Haskell Wexler, the writing team who had worked with Kubrick for Dr. Strangelove were
Yeah.
brought on board.
Yeah.
It's that gorgeous black and white photography that was really refined during that era. In terms of the content, however, what I really found was there's sort of a timelessness. It's very of the 60s, certainly. There's a lot of cult talk. There's a lot of like SoCal woo, which was sort of
woo.
SoCal woo, and it sort of spoke to what was going on. For example, in the Manson family, there's people who have a certain vernacular to get their message across. You have to. It's a club that if you want to be in, you got to knock 3 times on the rabbi's door, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it really not only touches on the idea of death, of finality, but also, sort of the perpetuity of wanting to know what's going to happen to you. And I think particularly in the 60s, which was such, it was a decade of upheaval. Compared to 55, only 10 years before, so many things had changed. Women's sexuality had been very liberated because the pill came onto the market. Kids were moving to Los Angeles to follow whatever, sunlit dream that they had. So the film is an unfairly overlooked piece of the 60s, but it also lives in a world completely outside of itself. And there's a melancholy, sort of a British sadness to it that the American films of the time, and 65, that was a big year. Lots of big titles came out that year. And this film was so far out, so dark, so bile-filled that after it debuted in Chicago on Christmas Eve, 1965, it kind of got lost as the 60s moved on. The studio and had no idea how to market it.
Right.
And looking at it today with modern eyes, I have to kind of come in at the same. I have no, it's a comedy, it's a drama, it's a behind the scenes peek. It's a beautiful homage to classic cinematography. In a very strange way, it's kind of a love letter to Los Angeles. But to my eyes, it reminded me a lot of RoboCop, which came out about 20 years later, where it's this big sprawling cast, and every line, every scene, every little bit of momentum is getting to this very black, comedic, satirical look. In RoboCop's case, at the city of Detroit, and in the loved one's case, the city of Los Angeles, big American cities with lots of history, lots of people. Ultimately, I think the fact that the loved one was directed and written and sort of brought to life by the British really gives it an outsider's perspective that adds to the sense of alienation, the sense of looking at something from the outside. And usually in those films, I think the audience sees that and maybe wants to be closer to the content. And in this case, this is not even a content warning. This is a warning. Like, this film is so offensive. It's so dark that you got to come into it understanding, this is kind of like, it's a bummer summer. Like, we're starting with death and we're going to end with death.
Finally, what can we learn from movie history that intently plays upon American and world history, especially through the elements of your upcoming presentations?
I love to learn about history, Pat. And I think that most people, if you ask them, are very interested in what happened in the past. In terms of how we learn about history, I find it very boring. Anybody can memorize years, and then this happened, and then names, and then this happened, and then this didn't happen. And there's sort of a linear approach to teaching history that I find so boring. And what I like to do is use films as both a snapshot of the moment and also a total rejection of the moment, because really good cinema really good films, important films, are totally outside of their time as much as they are in it.
It's a really
And
good
this
point.
and this series of films that I have curated touch on what was happening at the time in American culture, in women's history, in military history, in regional history, in medical history. And the best way to get those anxieties and preoccupations and actions and failures and successes across is if within 90 to 100 minutes, you can bring that narrative in a way where the audience wants to go with the film. And all the films I have chosen, they're not fast. They're kind of boring in many regards. They're not sexy. They're like, it's not really full of really beautiful people. The costumes are sort of boring, but the design, the attention to detail, and most of all, the crew, the writers, the cinematographers, the people who really brought those visions to life, both captured those moments and I think totally transcended them. And every film that I'm programming, as you know, as I reach out to audience members who have both come with me and who are thinking about attending one of my films, the films I have chosen are challenging. The films I have chosen will make you think, but man, if you stay with them, the slow burns always, always, always pay off. And that's why I think the films I choose and continue to choose are really fun to see.
This is Patrick McDonald for HollywoodChicago.com. Copyright 2026.